What concerns about long-term consequences of COVID?
I have a very bad sense about this.
The Delta variant is raging. Are there nastier variants coming?
Delta is highly infectious, but it's not as virulent as some of the previous, I call them COVID cousins. They are all closely related to the original SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, and then they are the cousins. Okay, so I think mostly it is because people are exhausted from the last 2 years of the pandemic. Mostly because people are deeply disillusioned with the dishonesty and the changing position that the governmental agencies, the top agencies, and the top academics have been repeatedly reversing themselves. Don't wear the mask. No, you have to wear the mask. If you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear the mask, etc. And very from the top of the National Institute of Health, at the top of CDC, there have been so many contradictory things that an average person, unfortunately, has lost trust and respect from those authorities. And so whenever we see these virology experts, when I listen to them, it's sad to say, but it looks like they are self-appointed experts. Because when I listen to them, I closely listen to them. You know that I was the chief of pathology and director of laboratories at Holy Name Medical Center, and we had a virology lab there, along with the microbiology lab here. So even for somebody like me, when I listen to them, I say there are so many real important issues, for God's sake. Why are you constantly staying with these two things? And then you're contradicting yourself. Weekly basis.
Wow. Well, it's very unsettling. But
and I can say one thing more about Delta. The Delta is going to illustrate, as we go along in this program, in a very eminent way, the very tragic things that I bemoan in my writings and in my, radio work, let's say, this television work, etc.
Right.
I think we have grossly deserved the humankind. Why humankind? Because for right reason or wrong reason, people in the world look towards us for guidance.
Right.
So American workers, American researchers, for right reasons, they have been held in high esteem. But now that thing is backfiring because there are so many people there. So when you go and look at their published work, first of all, there is none. And when there is one, you say, what he was saying on the radio and the television, that's not what he's writing. So where did that come from?
Right. Well, we hear of people getting reinfected.
Yes.
And, vaccinated people getting infected. How big of a concern is this?
Oh, I think these concerns are very real in the sense that ignoring the threat is not really a solution to the threat. Okay, so as I said, fortunately, it's not as serious a disease. It's more infectious. More people, catch it.
Right.
But the consequences of that have not been as serious as some of the other variants.
Right. Well, it's interesting. At least not realized at this juncture. Well, how long after the COVID-19 vaccination does the protection last, typically?
Very, very pertinent question. It depends upon the status of the immune system of the individual. So I believe, again, that making a generic statement for the whole society is missing the point. Because if individually a person has, I have never really worried about it. I've had vaccine, several months ago. But I'm not really preoccupied with it. We never closed our practice to COVID. We've had COVID patients all along, okay? So if your system is intact, mark simple way I can make this is, we should learn something from cockroaches about COVID-19. And that would include this Delta variant and all other variants, the South African variants and the Indian variants and the English variants, etc. You find cockroaches in the restaurant kitchens or sometimes in our residential kitchens, wherever the food scraps are put it in for disposal. It's a trash can. Especially during the night, late night, if you turn the light on, these buggers will come from everywhere.
Yeah.
Why are they going there? Because what is decomposing food for us is a delicacy for cockroaches.
Right.
Because the decomposing food basically means that the oxygen level in those foods is going to go down with decomposition and the acids will build up. So this is a partially digested beyond what we call it acceptable, digestible state of the food. But for cockroaches and the flies, this is perfect. So the virus nature has given a survival advantage not only to us humans, but also to its other creations. And the other creations include viruses, they include bacteria, they include cockroaches, and they include flies.
Right.
So whenever a person's oxygen level is low, because let's say he is extremely stressed, the arteries are tight, the muscles are tight, the blood is not flowing very well, okay? Or he's hyperventilating, or there is previous anxiety, or there is anger. All those things are going to reduce the blood flow differentially in different parts of the body, but they will. Now, the simple basic knowledge about this is that whenever oxygen in living system goes down, acidity goes up. And low oxygen and the high acidity are those two primal conditions which give a survival advantage to all viruses. It's not only COVID virus, okay? When we had the influenza virus, or there were epidemics yearly, it was the same thing. It was the people with asthma who were losing their life. Right now, at this time, you can call it comorbidities, or the other, that's a fine name, or comorbid conditions. Any pre-existing condition which empowers the invading flu, and in case COVID viruses, and weakens the host, that's going to be the weakest link of this whole thing. So when you say that how long the immunity lasts, if the person has strong, robust immune system, it will last for several months, and sometimes, it goes for more than a year. If, on the other hand, the immune system is weak, and your ability the immune system works by producing antibodies to fight off the microbes, okay? So if the immune system is not robust, and then let's say it is chemicalized, the immune system also needs the same thing. It needs a lot of oxygen, and it needs freedom from the tissue acidity.
Right.
Okay, and now there are many drugs which weaken the immune system. Steroids, which are being used for many reasons, they are designed to suppress the immune system. So many of those drugs, for example, when you use steroids for eczema, for example, asthma, well, in an asthma attack, you have to save the life. So whatever you have to do, if there's a child who can't breathe and there's a danger of child losing his life, well, I won't care. Intravenous ozone, yes, I would. Intravenous steroids, yes, I would.
Right.
So the overall immunity of the human race has been steadily going with the incremental rises in the environmental chemicals in our air, in our water, in our food, when you speak to someone softly and respectfully at work, or if you are a teacher, for example, that softness is infectious. because it would invite a softness in the response from the person that you're talking to.
Right.
No, we don't think of these terms as important parameters in immunity. But if you have a bad boss in a job who is constantly, he's insensitive, he's insulting people, the workers, etc., those things add up to cause the frustration. And the frustration eventually alters the immunologic status. So we know, for example, that depression depresses the immune system. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's well-known examples.
Right.
But I think that let me offer your viewers two small sentences. Okay, I think in most religious traditions in the world, there is something equivalent to this. When you begin with the name of God, we say God willing, for example. When you begin something with the name of the God, that defines and delineates the path to hope. And to that, I would say the path to healing begins with the point of hope. Mm-hmm. So now, what could be simpler than this if one makes a habit that whenever I want to say, you say, God willing, okay? It's a simple word, God willing,
right.
Okay? Now, these things are infectious, because if you are speaking to someone saying God willing, he will also have this emotion, because somewhere buried in our consciousness is the awareness in all of us, even for children, that there is a higher power, and the healing capacity is a gift from him.
Right.
So it is a universal thing. And then I think most people recognize that hope is essential for healing. So if you link the beginning of your work with the name of our Lord, and then that takes you to the point of hope, and then the hope is where the healing begins, you are already way ahead.
Right. It's a very good point. Well, many people are watching tonight. I mean, they've been infected and with COVID. What concerns about long-term consequences of COVID?
I have a very bad sense about this. I wrote my first flu pandemic book. It was published in 2006. It was about 1918 Spanish flu. The earliest indications are that COVID-19 is far, far more dangerous to the heart. The myocarditis, or the so-called viral myocarditis, which most cardiologists are familiar with, most of them are not very intimidated. We have very good hospitals. We have good coronary care units. So we are used to it. But I asked our son, he's a cardiologist, and in Boston. So I said, Omar, your group must have seen some COVID patients. He said, yes, unfortunately, too many. He works in a Lowell Hospital in neighborhood of Boston. So I said, overall, in the last several weeks, when you see these patients, they refer to you, to your group, cardiology group. Have you noticed any difference between this and the traditional viral myocarditis that you have, all your colleagues know this, that nurses know that, everybody knows that? He says, much bigger difference. Much, much bigger difference. So I said, in what way? He said, this virus takes away from the ability of the heart muscle to survive those attacks, because COVID virus, along with Ebola virus in Africa, along with dengue fever in the Far East, where I come from, these are family of viruses which have capacity to disrupt the clotting and the mechanisms which assure that there will be clotting to stop bleeding if there is, and they cause microscopic bleeding throughout the organ, throughout the heart, throughout the liver, throughout the kidneys, throughout the muscles. That's why these viruses are so dangerous and the mortality rates are so high.
Well, that's interesting because that's one of the biggest concerns about people that, just what you mentioned. Well, are there any safe or effective drugs to cure the COVID infections and the COVID diseases? I mean, I guess we're talking about pharmaceutical drugs, but maybe we can discuss the alternatives after that. But for pharmaceutical drugs.
Mark, my usual answer to this question is that the word cure should be struck out of English dictionary.
Uh-huh.
So I have to give you that. Ask me this. People who have been in reasonable health, who have reasonable habits of not getting dehydrated, who are not living on sugar and anger, okay? And they generally, there is a little bit of a walking among the trees or looking at the new leaves rustling in the breeze, etc. Or if there is a river or a pond, they just go by a walk. People who are living balanced and in equilibrium life, I don't think that they really have to worry about, because if you just focused on those two things, I emphasize the role of gut. So my first question to all my patients in my regular practice, whether they have virus or not, is how did you sleep last night? And my second question is usually that in the last 1 week, did you miss a bowel movement? Okay. Is your elimination effective and effortless and, if possible, odorless? I'm talking about special odors that become when you have a fermentation, etc. I think those parameters of health is what people should be going after. Unfortunately, on the radio and the television, we all bring about ivermectin is this drug that has been used for it, or deoxychloroquine, the anti-malarial has been talked about this. I saw one patient who I saw about 6-7 years ago. He had cancer of the throat, and he went through very difficult time, surgery, and part of the jaw had to be removed. So that was a difficult situation. So I remembered the details of this, and his wife was with him, and so I said, it's general knowledge that vitamin D3, we should not skip our dose, regular dose. So I generally recommend 4,000 units for my patients. Right. So I say to them, please don't skip it, okay? Vitamin D3, don't skip it, okay? Right. And of course, vitamin D3 test, there's a very good laboratory test. It's not very expensive, insurance covers it, so we routinely test for it. So I would say that vitamin D3 clearly stands out about vitamins in its value. So his wife told me, she said, we haven't seen you in the last 5-6 years, but one thing you've learned from you was vitamin D3. So she said, as the COVID conversation started, we remembered your words, and so we've been focusing. You used to say, whatever regular your practitioner is recommending, just don't skip it. Another example, for example, would be zinc. Zinc usually comes with copper, and usually the dose is either 25 milligrams or 50 milligrams.
Well, the copper, is it always comes with the copper? Or?
Almost always, because it turns out that if you take zinc for several months, there would be copper deficiency.
Oh.
Okay? So
you need to get the zinc with the copper.
Yeah, because health food industry has, I think, overplayed this hand. Yeah. So they give you 25 milligrams of zinc or 50 milligrams of zinc in a pill. I think that's a very good option. But they put sometimes copper more. And then I think copper is usually only 2 milligrams. So if zinc is 50 and copper is only 2, that's a very good ratio of 1 to 25, okay? So, but the point is, something with empirical experience all over the world almost, without the role of pharmaceutical, pumping it or something, whatever their reasons are, okay? Yeah, they have survived the test of time. So the practitioners who are not indebted to any particular pharmaceutical, force, they would recognize and they share this information with their colleagues, etc. So vitamin D3 and copper, for example, that's a very good thing to understand this phenomenon. One time it occurred to me that does vitamin B12 injections really work? They're very popular in different countries of the world, okay, in the East and the West, North and South. One time it occurred to me, how would the people in the East and the West and the North Pole and the South Pole doctors talk to each other and find out that we will only give vitamin B12 injections if the patient complains of fatigue? How did they do it? And if vitamin D did not have any specific advantage for countering, for example, you get COVID, and you are going to have a fatigue, and the fatigue may be worse, and it may last longer. So in those circumstances, why not do vitamin B12? Because empirically, it has been proven effective by a very large number, I would say, families and families of physicians. So I would do that. But then I realized that families of physicians also are focusing on magnesium. When I started this work, magnesium. I was in the laboratory and I was in pathology, yes. Okay? And I shifted over to this integrative side about maybe 35 years ago, okay? And at that time, listening to these colleagues in integrative medicine, everybody was enthusiastic about magnesium. So one time I was sitting in a hospital conference, Holy Name Hospital, Teaneck, New Jersey. And we had a guest speaker. And I noticed that all these guest speakers, they always are talking about calcium channel blocker drugs. And one speaker said, I give calcium channel blocker drugs for everything. Even if they have a headache, I give for everything. I was sitting in the back. I said, how interesting. If you go to integrative conferences of nutritionists or holistic practitioners, we prefer integrative, okay, because it's a broader thing. It has a clear implication of science and philosophy of holism in healing. Common sense tells us that every part of the body is related to every other part of the body. And the stress in one part of the body eventually is going to be transmitted. Everybody knows that, okay? So I was listening to him, and I said, this is interesting, that these guys on the pharmaceutical side, they sing the praises of calcium channel blockers for hypertension, calcium channel blockers for calcium channel blockers for headaches, etc. So he was talking about headache. And he said, I find out that regardless of what the symptoms is, regardless of what the diagnosis is, I prescribe calcium channel blocker drugs, and they are beneficial. And I said, on the other side, those guys, including me, we always prescribe magnesium, okay? Well, it so turns out, if you deeply study this, the calcium, like sodium and potassium in nature, is a pair. Yeah. Look, and calcium and magnesium in nature, living system, is also a pair.
Right.
Okay. Now you say that calcium channel blocker drugs, how do they work? They block the entry of calcium. And how do the magnesium work? Well, they work as natural, calcium channel blockers, okay, at the cell membrane. Empirical experience tells you, or you can just look at PDR. The calcium channel have clear downside, and the longer you use it, the more it is. Magnesium is something interesting. When you talk to people, I have no reason to sing magnesium more than anything else, because I have no financial interest with anybody this year. But I have interest in truth.
Yes.
I have interest in, I benefited from the knowledge, empirical knowledge of my teacher. My best of my teachers are my patients. So I have been benefiting from their advice and their experiences for a long time.
Yeah.
So if they come and they tell me I was taking magnesium for the cramps in the neck, or I took magnesium for bloating, or I took magnesium for constipation, and magnesium for a headache. So empirically, cumulatively, these things do add up to value.
Interesting. Well, speak about the benefits of hot water.
When I did this, whenever I hear about this indigenous therapies, I test it on myself.
Right.
When I heard about this, there were coincidences. And I realized from that, and where my mind took them to from that coincidences, that this is likely to be probably the single best indigenous natural therapy, which does not require patient to buy anything, invest in any technology, or take some teaching, learning courses, etc. And though this is straight, everybody can do it in the kitchen, and you don't have to buy anything for it. And I remember saying, I already know that I'm going to spend more time in writing about in natural therapy and promoting and fostering it and allowing people to have a deeper understanding of how this works, etc. And it was just a matter of starting writing it about. And at that time I knew that I would have a write-up for anybody who's interested. But from now on, whenever I'm writing some chapters or starting work on a book, for example, COVID book that I'm working on, I am going to give this a true subject. Now, the best way is if I tell you what I did today for your viewers. Last night, I took 1.5 teaspoons of psyllium husks, not the American Metamucil, but it comes from India. And all the Indian Pakistani shops, if you go there,
They're here in New York City.
They are everywhere, really. Yeah. There are many in New York City. And you ask for psyllium, they carry a brand which has a green, box, and it comes from India, and it says it is unprocessed psyllium husk. Okay, so I took 1.5 teaspoons of that in a glass of cold water at bedtime. That's it. Today morning, I took 10 ounces of water and I heated it to a boiling temperature. Then I took another 10 ounces of water, cold water, and then I mixed it. Now it was still hot, but you can't drink boiling water, you have to sip it. So I do this primarily to save myself a long time of sipping, boiling water. I just want to drink it over and get it over with. Why do I do that? And then I'll tell you the effects.
Right.
I think unless we make a special effort, most of us are going to be dehydrated sometimes during the day. And remember, dehydration increases. The easiest way to make somebody acidic is to dehydrate them. Because when you hydrate yourself, it's the water which takes a lot of those acids along into the urinary outflow and the fecal output, etc. So drinking 40 ounces, I'm talking about 20 ounces now of water. I have been doing this for about 40 years. I went into integrative medicine about 50 years, okay? I think I've been a student of medicine for about 63 years, okay? And I kept on switching my specialties and certifications, etc. So at that time, when I switched from my pathology and the surgery work into integrative medicine, at that time I became conscious that I have to make conscious effort to not get dehydrated. But more than that, I want a period of 1 or 2 hours of overhydration. Yes, you have to go to the washroom, but this is a small price to pay, especially if you do it in the morning. And as I said, I'm talking about my breakfast time. So So that is the one goal, that you do that if you do this therapy. I call it bioprotocol. If you simply say Dr. Ali's, bioprotocol. And I asked you for a few minutes because it is so important to me these days, this hot therapy, hot water therapy. I heard it several weeks ago from a Chinese speaker on New York radio. And I thought he is traveling through New York or he is a recent immigrant, because he had difficulty expressing himself in English. And yet the subject was so important that I was listening to him, and it was kind of annoying that I can't understand him fully. But I caught it. He said, in China, we have these flu outbreaks all the time, and everybody knows how to do quarantine in the house. And we drink a lot of hot water, and we give a lot of milk to our children. And these Americans, they get... I think that the Chinese feel, that they are being unfairly blamed for COVID-19, okay? Let's sidestep that matter, etc. Just stay with the medicine and the healing part of that, etc. I think that's why he was saying that. But still, he caught my attention. So I listened to him. I said, what is he promoting? Other than repeating hot water and hot milk for the children, I couldn't figure out what else is. He's already told me they do quarantine in their own houses, and they don't get upset about this because this is a commonplace, the flu outbreaks, etc. So that was one for the first thing. I reached my office, and one of our physicians is from India, Dr. Subita. So I said, Subita, do you have any ancient traditions in India that whenever there is spread of an infectious disease, either waterborne or the airborne, that you drink hot water without adding any teas in it? There are a lot of stuff you can do, that is ginger tea, turmeric tea, etc. I said, I'm only interested in the hot water type. Okay. She said, yes. And at that time, we were in COVID, and she had told me that somebody in their family back in India was affected by it, so it was personal to them for that. She said, yes, everybody's drinking hot water there. We've been doing it, our forefathers have been doing it, my father is doing it, my mom is doing it.
Whether it's in tea or in just hot water by itself.
They are interested in hot water.
Yeah.
And at that time, they don't talk about putting tea or making, extract of some kind, etc. So that was true. Second, the third coincidence was, one of my patients is a professor of political science, I think it's called, at Columbia here at New York. Maybe I misspoke it. Political science, I think he is professor of it. So he comes to me for various things, and that day, whatever it was, some skin problem. So when we finished it, I said, I have a different question, so maybe you won't mind it. Do you have any tradition among the Arab world of drinking hot water whenever there is an outbreak of infectious disease, airborne or waterborne, or etc.? He looked at me and he said, yes. I said, and when you were a young boy, did you see your grandparents do that? He said, yes. So I said, you come from Morocco, but the Arab nations are spread out. He said, almost everywhere you go in Arab lands, you will see this. That struck a chord in my mind.
Right.
I said, China is the most populous country in the world. India is number 2. If you put all the Arab countries together, that might come to number 3. What is the possibility that there has been a massive error for centuries and centuries, which is affecting the 3 largest masses of population, unless there was a merit in it? It is too much of a coincidence for me to say that if there was no true merit in this idea of drinking more water, hot water, and all bodily energetic reactions are time sensitive, and the human body guards its body temperature with exquisite sensitivity. So I said, no, it's not going to be. There has to be something. And I said, oh, these guys are talking about, sometimes they talk about fatigue, sometimes they talk about constipation, that's easy to understand. Sometimes they talk about bloating or the fatigue after the virus infection. Could it be that there is something really deeper inside? And then it crossed my mind that nature probably took 500-600 million plus years to perfect the nervous system. And nature probably took also similar 500 million plus or something like that to perfect the gastrointestinal system. Liver is part of that. And actually, pancreas comes as a part of the larger sense, etc. I said, no. Nature would have never spent 500 plus million years just to perfect the brain system and then say, oh, by the way, let's do the gastrointestinal tract, and there is spleen and there is liver there. I said, no, it had to be concurrent, evolutionary development, and there had to be a cross conversations between them, moment to moment. Okay, so it's not going to be, oh, pudendal nerve, yes, pudendal nerve is damaged by the surgeons and the prostate cancer surgery, and then they become impotent, and then they have to wear this, diapers and this sort of thing. That is a clear, easily demonstrable relationship between, let's say, the urinary sphincter in the neck of the bladder and the sense which tells you the place is available, you can empty your bladder. Or no, you have to hold it because there is no place available for that. I said, but this is an example where everybody would doubt, okay, pudendal nerve, etc. So it's a no. In my sense, the integration of the entire gastrointestinal tract and all reaches of the nervous system and the spinal cord system, etc., had to be moment to moment. And at that time, it occurred to me, is there a way that one could take an intestinal approach to the problems of the nervous system, anxiety, depression, headaches, migraine? I used to have migraine, that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I said, if you're drinking hot water like the way they are describing it to me, it has to have heated the internal lining of the gastrointestinal tract. Was it degree or was it half a degree? I can't tell, but it had to have happened. It would mean it was increasing the efficiency of all the digestive system, the enzymes and etc. That is obviously people are very happy who do that. By the way, everybody who does this has positive things to tell me about this. Everybody so far. Okay? But I am following a different trail. I'm trying to see how can we get a gastrointestinal approach, and what could be simple than drinking hot water. And if you want to add some ginger in it or some turmeric in it, God bless you, do that, etc. So far, Mark, not one of my patients have reported less than enthusiastic initial response to this. Okay, and they are drinking usually. I recommend 20 ounces, half cold and half boiling. But sometimes they take less than that. I don't think they take more than that. So I usually don't take more than that. But it will. So one time, a young guy came, and I had asked him to do it. So I said, that bio, protocol that I asked you to do, I just name it and game it and bio, because I was thinking of bioenergetics in the human body. Right. The oxygen bioenergetics, gut bioenergetics, insulin bioenergetics, etc. So he said, yes, I did it. I said, did you like it? He said, yes. I said, tell me. He said, it's good. I said, explain to me. He said, it's good. I said, can you tell me something about this? He said, it's good. I said, would you do it next week? He said, if you ask me to, you asked me to do it for 5 days. I did it for 5 days, and it's good. And if you gave me the permission, I said, you don't need me the permission. If you want to do it next week, do it, etc. But tell me, I can't write it's good, it's good, it's good. I like to write about this, etc. So give me something to hang on to it. He said, Dr. Lee, it's good. Oh, God. So I looked at him and I said, did you ever have depression? He said, yes. I said, did you ever see a psychiatrist? He said, yes. I said, he prescribed an antidepressant for you? He said, yes, that too. I said, so sometimes your psychiatrist did change the medication for you, right? He said, yes, sometimes he did. So I said, did it happen that sometimes instead of replacing it with one, he decided to just add a second medication? He was keeping the first one and he added the second one. He said, that happened once also. I remember I asked him to give me, I wanted to write it. I didn't want to forget what the medication. I said, why? He said, Dr. Ali, it was fantastic and I was afraid that he will forget what he gave me, okay? Because I never had any such good effects from other antidepressants. I said, could it be when you keep saying it's good, this water therapy, this bioprotocol that I talk about, that was that sense? He said, yes. I have been thinking about transferring, remember, if you're going to heat the temperature by, let's say, 1 degree, the
right.
inner lining of gastrointestinal tract, it is going to warm the blood a little bit. And that warm blood is going to go to the brain. And it is going to warm the cerebrospinal fluid, which bathes the brain and the spinal cord. Now, that temperature, I don't know. I can take an educated guess. Maybe it goes only 1/3 of a degree and half a degree. But many of the patients who will come back with water therapy, they are clearly describing effects which have something to do with their mood, something food with a general sense of being, okay? So I think that I can't give any specific information beyond that, but my strong impression is that all those three masses of human race which have been doing this, etc., religiously, they must have also found out that this has that's hot water taken this way, increasing slightly the temperature of the enzymatic reaction and the energetic reactions in the brain and the spinal cord and also the inner lining. It makes perfect ideologic sense to me that something is there. Now, is there anybody who should not do this? I have not seen yet.
Well,
so I think that hot water therapy is good.
That's amazing, and I'm sure we can go much deeper into that. But we mentioned earlier, and we just touched on it earlier, about the whole idea of comorbidity. What for our people that are watching, they don't know some of these terms. So what is the meaning of the medical term comorbidity?
Comorbidity means that you have two disease processes concurrently. So when you say that people die of comorbidities, Mark, I have not heard this thing from doctors on radio or television, nor have I read this. But we pathologists, when we do autopsy in a patient who dies in a hospital, who was brought up with the diagnosis of flu, which is the admitting diagnosis, when we do autopsy, it occurred to me when I was writing my Spanish flu book, when was the last time that I put flu in the box which causes direct cause of death? When you do autopsy, you have to produce an autopsy report. And this is going to be a permanent record. And so somebody can question you 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later. So we pathologists are very meticulous about this. We do not want to put anything in the autopsy, in the death certificate or autopsy report, which we do not have documentary evidence, either microscopic slides or the tissue blocks, etc., or the fluid samples, etc. I started thinking, how is it that I never, ever put flu as the cause of death? And I did probably something like 14 or 15,000 autopsies in those 25 years that I was in the hospital. And of course, I was head of the department, so I looked at the work of other people, etc. So then I called my associates Ask them the question. When was the last time you did an autopsy on a person who came to the hospital with a diagnosis of flu and passed on, and you did an autopsy? When was the last time you put the word flu? He said, I don't think I ever did that. So I checked all with all of my associates. That got me into a serious question. Is there any medical association in the world or any group of pathologists who do autopsy who have established criteria that can be used when you are certifying the patient as a flu death, going by those criteria, objective criteria?
Right.
I did not find. Do you know that no medical group, no medical association, has ever attempted to do that? They have known always. We put on the death certificate what we found at autopsy, which was the process of dying. It would be the fluid in the lung, so we say pulmonary edema. There is a condition called renal tubular necrosis. Whenever there is less oxygen in the process of dying, that kidneys will have this kind of a damage in the cells. But this is a very peculiar and easy thing to recognize, and easy thing to put in the report, okay? Or they would say, the pleural effusion or the effusion around the heart, etc. So there is nothing really. So comorbidity, that's a very important question that you raise. Since we do not have established criteria by which a pathologist can ever testify that this patient died in the hospital of flu, they can only say the admitting diagnosis. Remember, this is how Governor Cuomo got into trouble, okay? Right. Which means this is where I think our profession, my profession, medicine, I think we should reflect on it shamefully.
Well, you did mention in one of the articles that you had done at the Nature, the top science journal in the world. You had written an article titled "The Geo Vision," G-I-O Vision, and the Geo Model. And it's interesting because you mentioned there that the simple and shameful neglected truths that could have saved millions of American lives and prevented American near-complete socioeconomic collapse.
Thank you for bringing that subject up. I think this should, in any educational program, whether it is for the college students or the high school students or what we are doing for the public, I think there is no more important subject in the entire pandemic, this or the future which might come in, because this is not going to be the last COVID pandemic, which is what kills the patient. What kills the patient is what we have. Especially people who have end-stage kidney disease before they go on dialysis. The death rate in that group almost doubled within the first year of that. Then you look at the number one cause COVID morbidity is invariably diabetes. And that is what? That is excess acidity in the body, and that is lack of oxygen, and that is the immune system is very weak in diabetics. They don't heal their wounds. They don't fight their infections, okay? Then the next is asthma. Now I'm going to ask you to a simple question. If the number one cause is diabetes, number two cause is asthma, and people who go to dialysis, they go to dialysis after the kidney damage by poor circulation, heart problems, and toxicities, nutritional problems, metabolic problems, etc. Or the liver. The liver is also, okay. What is the commonality in all these conditions which we are calling comorbidities? We identify the diabetes as top of the list. We say next is asthma. Then we say it's kidney failure. Then we go over to the liver failure. Mark, this is my love of learning. If you focus on these comorbidities, what are the basic things? There are three bioenergetic systems of the body which are involved in it. Oxygen bioenergetics, number two, insulin bioenergetics, number three, gut bioenergetics. So I borrowed the word geo from Punjabi, which is my mother's tongue. Geo is a word of prayer. And so the grandmothers used it more often for grandchildren than the mothers used it for children. I guess grandmothers have more awareness of certain things than mothers do, okay? Because it's a prayer. It means, may you live long purposefully. So it is the word purposefully which gives them this special effect of this here. So the point of this is, I adopted that word because I was writing about insulin, molecular biology of oxygen, or molecular insulin homeostasis, and the gut microbiome, and the gut ecology. And I'm addicted to writing. So
yeah, at the very least.
Right. So I was writing and constantly repeating this. So one day I said I have to have an abbreviation, a suitable abbreviation. So randomly I took a piece of paper and I was reading it and I said, let me put down whatever it is. And so there were these three things, gut and insulin and oxygen. And as I put that in there, gut came first and insulin after that, and O for oxygen, geo. And immediately my mom's prayer came to my mind and my grandmother's. So I started using the word geo. The Nature paper that you referred actually was, I was very pleasantly surprised, truly pleasantly surprised.
Well, it's a very prestigious, are we talking about that they had taken that article?
Yes.
It's a very prestigious science journal that is.
Yes, it is.
Everybody strives to get in their works into that journal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm telling you what was surprising.
Worldwide.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If you ask people in the scientific field, if you ask professor of any scientific field in any school, in any place in the world, and you tell them, you have a choice of these 5 scientific journals, where would you like to have your work published? Invariably, they will say it's in Nature. Nature is number 1. The title of my talk was The Geo Vision of Living Well with COVID-19. And I was not focusing on vaccines, and I was not focusing on the isolation. I was focusing living well, because how long are we going to wear the masks? How long are we going to put our children, before computer screens, and that's the total education that they get? How long are we going to close off half of the restaurants in New York or Chicago or anybody? How long are we going to live with this psyche that this is something, and you don't talk about, you go find a drug like ivermectin, okay? So where did that go? Find a drug like hydroxychloroquine for malaria. Mm-hmm. So they keep talking about this here, etc. They are not focusing on something which is glaring us. It is the morbidities, comorbidities, and we know the treatment of diabetes. More than that, if you really focus on insulin and learn for example, our group, when we see a patient with diabetes, we don't think of treating him. My opening sentence is usually, I would like to work with you and reverse it. Uh-huh. Now that is almost, I never overheard this from doctors who are practicing pharmaceutical medicine. Always there is one drug and another drug.
It's a pretty big nut to crack.
Yes and no, because
for most doctors.
Yeah. But if the patient knows the facts and the science, and if you can demonstrate, again, when the first paper where I published that, the title of that was shifting focus from glycemic status, which is blood sugar testing or A1C testing for diabetes, shifting focus from glycemic status to insulin homeostasis. That was the first time I wrote a serious article supported by a very strong body of data, which says that if you wait for the glucose test to become positive for diabetes, it's going to be 5, 10, or 15 years after you can diagnose, if you diagnose it with insulin. Right. And what happens in those 5, 10, or 15 years? When by insulin testing, the patient is clearly diabetic. But the sugar testing is not, because the body keeps producing more and more insulin, which keeps the blood sugar down.
Right.
So regardless of whether you do it for 5 years or 7 years or 8 years, the glucose is not going to be positive. The insulin will keep positive. And insulin is very toxic.
Right.
Two things happen with that thing. One, the brain shrinks. And you can tell it by doing MRI scan. Mm-hmm. That's how we do it. Second, the liver swells up with stagnant fat. That's called fatty disease of the liver or steatosis. And we tell it by doing ultrasound. These things are so routine, they are so absurdly simple. The only thing is that if you do this approach of reversing diabetes, there are no drugs which can reverse diabetes. So the pharmaceutical industry has all the interest in making drugs, and they have done a fantastic job. Let's give them credit for that. To come up with the pharmaceutical agents, they have not been interested in trying to promote the knowledge of reversing. Reversing has something to do with nutrition. Reversing has to do something with the philosophy, and the philosophy of anger. I was talking about, begin whatever you want to do with Lord's name, and it will take you to hope. Right. And begin with other things, and then you get controversies and conflicts and eventually chaos. Okay, I think it's a matter of philosophy.
Well, I mean, with that title, the GeoVision of living well with COVID-19, you did mention in that it's a model of preventing and reversing COVID morbid conditions that cause the viral fatality.
The first paper where I said we need to shifting focus from the glycemic sugar testing or A1C to insulin, that was also published in Journal Nature. Mm-hmm. Okay, these are e-publications, but the whole world is doing e-publications in the science communities, etc. It's faster, there's more space available, there's a readier action, etc. So I think there is no other reason that I can think about. There's a big difference between the nature piece. The long piece was the GeoVision. And that was what impressed me. Nature accepted the word vision because when you publish an article on vision, you are not saying that we have the data and here the table, this one. This is saying we are presenting evidence of the phenomenon which has been published, which could be the author's original or some other people. And when you conjoin all those observations and a sort of a meta-analysis type of a thing, put a large body of data by other people's work and try to draw some inferences from that, okay? That comes to vision. Somebody is looking into the future and he's looking at the pieces and he said that he thinks that if these pieces could be put together, there is a very good chance that this will be the outcome. In theoretical physics, mostly they start with, these models. And the models are that we think based on this, and this, that this is what is happening and this is the underlying mechanism. Mm-hmm. In real science writing, the word mechanism and the word models are used very extensively. Right. Okay? And everybody understands that. But when you say the model, the implication is the models are supported with bodies of data. When you are trying to vision is like aspiration, like it's like hope. Yeah. That I'm not saying I have proven this, but it's when I look at all the body of the data, it tempts me to do more work in this direction, and I'm offering it to other people, so they may also want to consider this kind of a reasoning, the data that we present, and to see if they want to also advance the science knowledge in this particular field.
Right.
Okay.
Inspirational.
That's right. Yeah. There is a clear idea of inspiration, and also when you try to inspire, you always invite people also. Okay. So the invitation to consider this and advance the field.
Well, so most at risk for complications from COVID, those with diabetes, obesity,
asthma,
hyperinsulin, asthma, and
death from
COVID immune
failure.
Inflammatory diseases. Yeah. I recently received some news from my family that one of my family members had received the vaccine, had a unfortunate side effect of having some type of immune system reaction to both this person and the twin that had both gotten the vaccine.
We know that what we call diabetes follows a long course of events called prediabetes. Now, prediabetes is going to compromise the immune system. Prediabetes is going to reduce the oxygen supply. Prediabetes is going to increase the total acid load. So if you were to say that a person who have prediabetes is compromised, okay, the answer is yes. I would not say that these people should never have vaccination. I would say focus on those things concurrently. So why don't you give yourself 3 months or 3 weeks of just learn what would you do from somebody who works with reversing diabetes.
Right.
There's a difference in between treating diabetes and reversing diabetes. Reversing diabetes, you have to be more aware of the mechanism, you are more aware of the models, etc. And okay. Now, if there is a family tendency, because diabetes has a strong tendency to run in families, but the family is also, diabetes is going to be preceded by prediabetes, and the prediabetes is going to compromise. That's actually what I mean by shamefully neglected.
Right.
Okay, all of us in the medical profession. We have known all this for a long time, that viral fatalities are related to coexisting condition. We all agree that diabetes is on number one. Then why don't we look at these people at really very high risk and do the appropriate test? And for me, yes, I go all the way. Insulin is the best way to detect early diabetes. Mm-hmm. And look at then the issues of weight, look at the issues of food, look at the issues of stress, and, general, walking, I think, is for most people the best exercise there is.
You wrote a book about the 1918 pandemic. What lessons are you now learning from the COVID?
Number one, I would say truth. This idea of governmental agencies filtering this information with the presumption that some government officials have almost divine inclinations of what's going to happen in the future. Okay, I think that is there. And the other thing is that we physicians have to be much more aware of who needs our care most at what stage of the pandemic. So if we would focus on people who have these coexisting conditions, rather than have the front for everyone, WHO, in my judgment, did a bad mistake. Initially, when it came here in the early part of 2020, they were saying that 30 to 33 times as many deaths as the seasonal flu. Well, by those estimates, Iceland would have been wiped out of this world. Similarly, in Uruguay in Latin America, both of those countries survived they evaded all these bad things which happened in the United States. Amazingly, because of two people, one person in Uruguay and one person in Iceland. And there were case reports of both in Journal Nature. Also British Medical Journal.
How is that so that
Because the story of the guy from Iceland is especially very, very inspiring story.
We don't have that much time, but they're just...
Well, I think what I would suggest is people Google it.
Okay.
Google COVID-19, Google Iceland, and Google will give them a very good story.
Uruguay also.
But I promise, and they can Uruguay. These are the two most inspirational stories that I have read, in a long time, and they can just Google it. Okay, they will get reports from the British Medical Journal. They will also get reports from the Journal Nature, and they will get a lot of inspiration, and they will learn the lesson that we should take all the official information with a grain of salt. Okay, we should also get it from information from people who are in the field, who are actually doing the work here, who are close to the patients, and who can, see these things, etc. And I think there is a big disconnect between the ability of the officials, administrative sides, to give good advice on complex scientific matters. And whenever you talk about, Delta strain, for example, you have to have a depth of these things. I will give you an analogy. If you want to give me 3 slides, one from breast cancer, one from colon cancer, one from lung cancer, well, if I did this work for 40 years and took responsibility for diagnosing 130,000 cancers in about 40 years, well, I have a deep sense of these things. So I will look at this just like in your work, when you were working, with your airport, plane parts, etc. But trying to get an administrative staff who has never any true life experience and stand them before television cameras, and the whole world gets this, etc. These embarrassing retractions that what happened on television, that was a shameful, display. They didn't have maturity. They didn't have depth of knowledge.
Well, tell us what specifically those retractions were.
Retractions were, the masks are useful, the masks are useless.
Right.
The mask should be done outdoors, the mask should be done only indoors.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And a lot of this thing was nonsense. And then earlier on, when you talked about ivermectin, for example, when you talk about dexamethasone, the British, it's interesting. When you think about these therapies, dexamethasone came out of England, initially Bristol, etc. British have a more seasoned approach to this, because I think they are not facing the same pressure of sensationalism. And usually, British are more careful about the references. I noticed that British will give Lancet and Nature a higher preference, okay, in their public reporting, the news media, etc. In most people in America, they really don't know what Nature is, what the journal Science is, so they don't have their own depth of perspective.